Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China called Washington's statement that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, would be ready to conduct even a 500% tariff on Chinese products if the People's Republic of China continued to purchase Russian oil. This was stated, in particular, by United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who noted that Donald Trump is considering such a possibility. In response, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs threatened tough measures that China could take if such a prohibitive tariff really came into force. However, even a 100% tariff on Chinese products, which should be put into effect in early November, will also be enough for serious problems in the Chinese economy and trade with the United States and other countries of the world. However, so far, Donald Trump has promised to impose such serious prohibitive tariffs, hoping that this will strengthen the position of the United States in trade negotiations with the People's Republic of China, and, in turn, force Beijing to abandon its own prohibitive measures and restrictions. In the case of Russian oil, everything may look different. The purchase of this oil for the leadership of the People's Republic of China can be not only a matter of economic benefit, but also a matter of political solidarity. After all, in this way, the leadership of the People's Republic of China supports Russian President Vladimir Putin in his aggressive war against Ukraine and allows the Russian president to mitigate the effect of Western sanctions against the Russian economy. Without a doubt, if it were not for the Chinese and Indian purchases of Russian nefty, Putin would have long been forced to think about suspending military operations, and Western sanctions would have acted much more appeasingly and sobering on the aggressive Russian president and his entourage. However, it is now unclear to what extent the leadership of the People's Republic of China is ready for a long-term confrontation with the United States in exchange for continued support from Russia. The same can be said about India. President Trump said at his press conference that the Prime Minister of India had promised him to refuse to purchase Russian oil on a render fashion. However, so far the promises of the Indian Prime Minister have not been converted into a real refusal. Moreover, after the introduction of tariffs on Indian products, which were explained by Donald Trump, including the fact that India finances Russia's war against Ukraine, purchases of Russian oil at Indian enterprises have only increased. And even the sanctions of the European Union and the United Kingdom, directed against the largest plants producing petroleum products from Russian oil, did not lead to New Delhi's refusal to purchase Russian raw materials. But with India, however, Donald Trump may find it easier to negotiate than with China, because it may be a matter of economic benefit. After all, cheap raw materials are primarily important for India. And if Washington finds any option acceptable to the Prime Minister of India in a render fashion, he may refuse to purchase Russian oil. Simply put, if it is made from cheap enough American oil or oil from the Persian Gulf countries, it will be possible to produce petroleum products and receive the same premium benefits that Indian refineries currently receive from purchases of Russian oil and the production of petroleum products from this oil. In a render fashion, may refuse a significant number of Russian purchases in order not to spoil relations with the United States that are important for New Delhi. Things may be different with China because the purchase of Russian oil by the Chinese regime is part of a big trade war between Washington and Beijing. Wars for influence in the Asia-Pacific region. A war in which the People's Republic of China seeks to prove the inability of the United States to change the world order, in terms of further preserving the rules and striving for its further chaoticization in favor of authoritarian regimes. And in this sense, Vladimir Putin's Russian Federation, especially after the outbreak of the Great Russian-Ukrainian War, acts as the real vanguard of authoritarianism. The defeat of this aggressive country in the Russian-Ukrainian War will simultaneously be a victory of the civilized world, a victory of common sense, a victory of good over evil, and a defeat of the ambitions of the People's Republic of China. Therefore, the question arises as to what economic costs and sacrifices the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, is willing to go for the sake of supporting the Putin regime and successfully promoting Russian aggressive ambitions in Europe. And what costs is Donald Trump willing to go to in order to stop not only Russian aggression, but also Chinese geopolitical ambitions, and thus ensure the United States against possible aggressive actions of the People's Republic of China against Taiwan? In fact, everything will consist precisely in the willingness of Beijing or Washington to the costs. Whoever is willing to sacrifice a sufficient amount of money in order to break the enemy's influence will win in this global confrontation, which every time threatens to turn from an economic war into a real military confrontation with the use of the latest weapons. But now there is still a struggle for Russian oil. And, as we can see, neither Washington nor Beijing is going to concede. A lot will depend on whether Donald Trump really decides to impose protective tariffs against the People's Republic of China, and whether European countries join the American sanctions, which in this situation, in theory, should at least impose sanctions against Chinese and Indian enterprises that buy Russian oil and produce petroleum products that are still being sold on the market of the countries of the civilized world, and thus helping the survival of the cruel and unjust Putin regime. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks for channels in Patreon, BAME, Coffee, and Donatello, which help to develop these resources. Use the sponsorship function in YouTube itself.